Are we on? Hi, everybody. My name's Micah. I'm a PhD in poetry.
Hi, and I'm Few, an MFA in poetry, and we are Over
Over
Poetry.
poetry.
Ha ha ha.
Each episode will bring two public domain poems to enjoy live before your very eyes.
Yes, yes. And today's episode is going to be on Robert Frost.
Robert!
Woo! And the first thing we're going to do is we are going to go over to armchair psychology as Micah explores the psyche of one Robert Frost. Take it away, Micah.
I'm happy too. I'm so happy. So, I think to sort of set the stage and explain why Robert Frost matters so much is because he is the only poet to receive 4 Pulitzer Prizes for poetry.
Whoa.
I mean, he also was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal in 1960 for his poetic works. He was named the Poet Laureate of Vermont. He was one of JFK's favorite poets. He read at his inauguration very famously, but he never received a Nobel Prize.
Oh, dang.
He should have, but he never did. But, like, if you think of American poets, most people think of Robert Frost because he's just so iconic. I mean, but he's iconic, but I think it's important to revisit people's perceptions of him because I think a lot of people who were, including myself when I was just starting out in poetry, had this vision of him as kind of like this kindly grandfather figure who just kind of said wise things, and he was from New Hampshire and he just like smoked a pipe and stuff. And that is true. Like he was like he was wise and he was a grandfatherly figure and he was an American institution, but he was also a complicated human being. His poetry, I think, is great because it reflects how complicated he was. And so I feel like we have to appreciate that. And so, in order to appreciate that, I wanted to talk about what made him him. Does that
Okay.
sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great. And just like my thoughts real quick, yeah, I feel like Robert Frost is like the stereotypical American poet. You know, like when you think American poet, you think
Mm-hmm.
Robert Frost. Like you think of children memorizing poems in schools in the 50s and 60s, like
Mm-hmm.
he's going to be there. He's going to be top choice for poets to have memorized by children, just like so connected to American landscape, um, and like also tied deeply into English poetry tradition, you know, and so
Yeah.
like he is absolutely a top choice to go to, and one who has had poems reach very far wide audiences with poems that are still very like respected today in popular culture. So so yeah, I do think it's smart, like you're saying, not to just glance over it. Let's look deeper at this man, this one poet. So yeah, what you got on Robert for us?
Well, I wanted to start with a description of him that I found very interesting. So I was reading the Salem Press Biographical Encyclopedia, and at Frost's 75th birthday, and he lived well into his 80s, so 75th birthday, Lionel Trilling called him terrifying. Like he was a terrifying poet. Not that he was a dangerous man, but that his poems could be very dark. I mean, he wrote a lot of beautiful nature poetry. He wrote about his love for the environment, but he wasn't just America's grandpa. Like he was capable of brutal nihilism, and what I find so fascinating in him is that he managed to balance those things. So he was born in San Francisco in 1874. His father died when he was pretty young. He never finished college. He felt called to be a poet from an early age. And when his father did die, he left the family $8 total. So they were
Oh,
living in abject poverty. So Robert, like from a young age, there's this implication that I read in a few different articles. Obviously, I have no idea if it's true or not. That his father was maybe having an affair at the time of his death, And so that was like led to some of Robert Frost's complicated feelings towards his mom. Like, anyway, that's a whole other thing we'll get into later. But he couldn't really pursue his dreams and he couldn't really go to college because he felt like he had to help his mom with the finances. And later in life, he did go to Harvard, but he never finished, partially because of illness, and partially, in my opinion, because he just he had a massive ego, um, and that's kind of why we love him. But anyway, he got his first poem published in 1894. It's about a butterfly. It's really kind of lovely. And he's so excited. Again, this is from the Salem Press Biographical Encyclopedia. He goes to his girlfriend at the time, Eleanor, and he's so excited. He's like, I want to start this new life with you. I'm going to be like a legitimate poet. But she was in college at the time, and he thought she'd fallen in love with another person. So he demands that she leave. She refuses. She says college first. And he is in such deep despair that he's like, I'm going to go kill myself. And not only am I going to go kill myself, but I'm going to do it in the Great Dismal Swamp to like show you how deeply you have wounded me. But he fails in his attempt. He rethinks this thing. He's like, maybe I should just like ask her again. And though he doesn't kill himself, obviously, but I just love it's so dramatic. It's like such an angsty poetry guy thing to do. Just be like, I'm just gonna kill myself in the Great Dismal Swamp because my girlfriend is maybe possibly in love with someone else. But anyway, that doesn't happen.
Thank
Anyway,
goodness.
yeah, he finally persuades Eleanor to marry him. And her parents are not thrilled about this because, I mean, he's not got any money. He did. His grandpa had some money, but his mom didn't have any money. So it was kind of a precarious financial situation. I don't know. And Eleanor, like, she was co-valedictorian with Robert. Like, she was very smart in her own right. She arguably could have gone on to do other things, but Robert Frost was like, "No, I'm gonna be great. Like, get on board with me." Is that how you say it? Like, get on board my train? I don't know. Get in the car with me. Take this ride with me. You know? And it's complicated from the beginning because I wonder if she resented him for that in some ways.
Sure, sure.
And I think also I don't know if we want to get into this or not, but one of his later poems that he published after she died, um, which is called the Unperturbed Flower. No, something flower. And basically, he himself admitted it's about he thought his wife was frigid. Like, he
Oh,
felt like he had way more of a sex drive than she did. But I also think there's part of it, like, several of their children died. And one of them died while she was giving birth.
oh
So I'm
wow.
wondering if she had some, like, depression about that. And I don't know. I don't know. I mean, that's their personal life, but so I'm purely speculating. But he did specifically say that that poem that he published after she died was about her, and that it was about frigidity in women. And I'm just kind of like, I don't know. I'm wondering if that could have contributed, in addition to the precarious finances and some other things, to a rocky marriage. But they loved each other deeply, but also they they were bound together, but there were deep resentments. I don't know. It's a fascinating dynamic to me. I don't know. Their marriage is so fascinating to me because when she dies, he's waiting like at her deathbed for days. I guess wanting some kind of closure before she dies, like wondering, was this worth it? We suffered so much together in life. We lost so many of our children. We spent so many years in very precarious financial um, tumult. But was it worth it? And she never says. She never answers him. And I think
Oh
it
wow.
bugged him for the rest of his life. because he just wanted to know, like, I think he really wanted her to say, like, it was hard, but it was worth it because of the life we built together, and she didn't. And so I don't know if she was just in such pain herself. I don't know. I don't know. But also, here's another wrinkle to throw in case that wasn't complicated enough. His relationship with his mother is obviously the typical single mom son relationship where he felt like deeply connected to her, but also like maybe a little too connected to her. Like, I don't
Oh
know.
no, going down a Freud rabbit
I
hole.
know, I know, I know, but we have to because, okay, granted, the family was poor. The family was poor, so they didn't have a lot of rooms in their house.
Mhm.
But Theodore Morrison, he wrote this article that was published in the Washington Post a million years ago called The Agitated Heart about Robert Frost. And he said that Robert Frost slept in his mother's room until at least well into his high school years.
Hmm.
And again, I'm not suggesting sexual impropriety. I'm not saying anything like that.
Sure,
I'm just
sure.
saying they were extremely close. And when his mom died, Robert Frost would have been 26. It really messed him up, as it would anyone, but I think it was even more pronounced, the grief for him, because he felt, I mean, his mother believed in him 100%. His mother told him constantly, "You're going to be great." And he
Hmm.
was great. So
Yeah.
it was her belief in him that I think propelled him to greatness as a poet, made him believe in himself, but also I think it did strain his relationship with his wife because his wife could never match that level of adoration.
Hmm. Sure, sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Um, yeah, and that's the thing that I don't know. That just makes me think of how so many men out there in marriages like are kind of looking more for a mother than a wife, you know,
Yeah.
like more of someone to take care of them or whatever. This is why marriage is just so much better for men than women,
Mm.
statistically speaking, or whatever. Um, but anyways, yeah, yeah, keep going.
Well, so again, his grandfather had some money. His mom didn't have any money, but his grandfather had some. So his grandpa set him up at a farm for a few years in New Hampshire. But Robert Frost, he really didn't want to be a farmer. He wanted to be a poet. And, even though he wasn't getting any success in America as a poet, he couldn't get anything published. So he was like, screw this. So he moves the family to England, hoping to get some success kind of as the exotic American in England. And he totally did. He published two of his books there, both of which are arguably his most famous: The Boy's Will, North of Boston. I also do, and again, I'm totally armchair psychoanalyzing this guy. I'm wondering if it was because he lost two of his children when he was in New Hampshire.
Mm,
I'm wondering if he was like, I'm so done with this place. Like, I just want to get away from these memories.
sure.
Again, I don't know, but it's definitely the publication. Like, he did find success in England as sort of the rustic American, you know?
Now, do you think any of this had to do with like Ezra Pound and like T.S. Eliot and like expatriates who were like going
Oh, I'm
over to
so glad you
England?
asked. I'm so glad you asked. Because that's complicated too. Because Ezra Pound was one of the few people who favorably reviewed A Boy's Will.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
if you look in Poetry magazine, back in the day, amidst all these negative reviews of A Boy's Will, there was one favorable one written by Ezra Pound, who says this guy's got potential. So Pound helped establish Frost's reputation. He was one of Frost's
Mm,
initial original supporters. But he wanted Frost to be on Team Modernism. He was like, "You're going to be my disciple."
right.
And Frost was like, "No, no, no, I'm going to do my own thing." So, and that strained relationship continued throughout both of their lives. Like, there's one time, like, Frost is giving a speech at like an Ivy League college. He mentions Pound, and then Pound writes a letter, and it's like, "You totally misrepresented me, you asshole." It's just like such a fraught relationship. But then, guess who's instrumental in getting Ezra Pound not locked up in prison for the rest of his life after war crimes in Italy.
Oh, sounds like Frost, right? Robert
Yep.
Frost.
Yeah, because Frost had some pull by that time. Anyway, a lot of
Wow.
that's speculation too. Who knows what went on behind the scenes, but Frost did some finagling for his old buddy Pound. Anyway, but early in
Hmm.
his career, Frost was like grateful for Pound's assistance, but also he kind of wanted to do his own thing because he didn't really fit
Right.
in with the modernists and the imagists. I mean, he was this guy, he wasn't strictly metered, but he was kind of traditional, more so than they were
Hmm.
in his poetry sensibilities. A lot of what he writes feels more like it's in the 19th century than in the 20th.
Hmm. Hmm.
But he was very forward thinking in his own ways. Anyway, they go to England, and he's this again complicated man. He single-handed, I think, saves the life of Edward Thomas, who's another writer, and they had a fraught relationship through their whole lives too. But it's an example. Like Frost could be extremely encouraging to other poets and writers. Like he tells Edward Frost, "You've got potential." Like Edward Frost was going to kill himself. He's like, "I have no purpose in
Wait, what
life."
was his name? Edward Thomas, did you say?
Edward Thomas, sorry, I misspoke. I said Edward Frost. Edward Thomas, sorry. But I don't think anyone would know who Edward Thomas was if not for Frost. Because Frost kind of pulls him back from the abyss and is like, no, you've got potential. Like, Frost could be extremely encouraging to his friends when he wanted to be. There's a lot of stories about him being a jerk and being egotistical, most of which are true. But he could also be just as loyal, just as kind. And, you know, but as a dad, he did have a dark side. So,
Yeah, yeah. We both we both had Professor Michael Lavers at UYU
mhm,
University, and I remember him telling some story involving like his Robert Frost's family and a
right.
gun, and I don't
Yes.
really remember it. I don't know if you're going into it, but yeah, it sounds
Yes.
like there were some troubling things or whatever, some dark things.
Jeffrey Wolf, in the Washington Post, this was like 1977? I think it was. Anyway, the article's called The Dark Side of Frost. You can still look it up. But he tells this story um, about Frost as a parent. He said, he suffered a lot. Their family suffered a lot. One daughter fell mad and was pent up. The other, Leslie, told his father that he should never have married. But her
Oh,
harshness should be put in the context of, quote, an impoverished and tormented childhood, one of whose principal features was terror. Once, when she was a child, Frost roused her late at night from her sick bed, summoned her to the kitchen of their New England farmhouse. There she found her mother, and on the kitchen table a revolver. She was asked to decide which parent she preferred that her father shoot.
what?
Yup. So that I'm sure that was fun as a child.
Oh, that is cringe. That's not good.
I will also say though, Frost did towards the end of his life try really hard to reconcile with his surviving kids.
Okay.
Did he do so successfully? I don't know, but I think he was. I'm not trying to make excuses for him. I mean, that's obviously a horrific thing to do to a child. I don't know. I don't want to pass judgment on him as a parent because he was dealing like 4 of his children died before he did. I mean, that's rough. But I also think he didn't. Let me get there. Let me get there.
Okay.
Let
Okay.
me.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that like, we don't really need to excuse it. It was a terrible
No.
thing that he did,
Right.
and yeah, that's just part of the truth of Robert Frost, who he was.
Yeah. The same article that I mentioned earlier by Theodore Morrison, The Agitated Heart, I think the first paragraph sums it up. Like, the only way to describe a man so complex as Robert Frost is to say that he was a bundle of paradoxes. that he was made up of pairs of opposites, both of which were true of him at the same time. He was, for example, a great man who contained a small man. His intellectual endowment, even apart from his poetry, was immense, and at his best he had a wide and sympathetic humanity. He was also capable of seeing enemies where none existed, capable of nursing grudges and sulking over fancied slights. The most famous example, arguably, was when he tried to burn down the Breadloaf Conference.
Oh, what was this? What was the Breadloaf Conference?
Breadloaf, in case anybody doesn't know, it's like a writers' conference in New England where people gather to read poetry and talk about how great they are. And no, it's great. It's great. Anyway, but in the same article, the Washington Post, The Dark Side of Robert Frost, you can read all about it. But it says that Frost had been sort of the keynote or the main speaker for a few years. And one year they decided, it's Robert Frost has had his turn. Let's give the keynote speaker address. I don't think they called it that, but like the main speaker to this up and coming poet, Archibald MacLeish. Well, Frost is not happy with that, and he creates a humiliating disturbance, which prompted his longtime friend, Bernard DeVoe, to remark, "You're a good poet, Robert, but you're a bad man." That disturbance, um, he was taking matches and lighting them in the back of the hall. I don't know. Was he trying to burn down the place, or was he just trying to distract from MacLeish's reading? I don't know, but it's a very strange thing to do.
Okay, so just for clarification, Archibald is like giving some sort of main speech, some keynote
Mm-hmm.
address or something,
Right,
and Robert Frost is somewhere also within view, just
right.
like lighting matches, um,
Throwing them on the floor. Yeah,
throwing them on the floor. Okay, so this isn't
still lit.
Spider-Man Noir where he's just letting them burn to his fingertips so he can feel something. So
No, they're still. I think they're still lit,
they're still
falling
lit.
to the lit, falling to the floor.
Oh, okay.
I think so. Again, I don't know. I think he was just his ego was bruised. He wanted to be the main speaker, which again, this is a guy with 4 Pulitzer Prizes. Like, arguably, he deserved it. But also, you would think he would be, for someone who was as capable as he was of encouraging new poets, like, why did that set him off? I don't know. I don't know.
Hmm.
But it was a weird spasm of ego. Um,
Wow, interesting. But he had spoken at it before, right?
mhm, yeah.
Uh, hmm. Okay, okay.
So they
Wow.
didn't think that they were slighting him at all, but he perceived it that way. And
Right.
I don't know. Stories like that make it hard to sympathize with him. And yet, okay, first of all, a lot of the stories come from these massive volumes. This is just the first volume of his biography by Lawrence Thompson, by the way. This
Ah.
massive thing, just the first volume. There are multiple. But a lot of the stories about his life come from these. They're exhaustively researched, and they cover like literally everything, like what he drank, like everything he ate, like
Wow.
basically everything about his life. Um, but I think it talks about, this is the end of like the first one, the early years. Something that he talks about that I find so inspiring as Frost is he just would not give up. Like, even, I mean, he wasn't even a very successful poet until middle age, but he would not give up. Like, he'd been fighting a continuous battle on various fronts, and he felt he'd have to settle for nothing more or less than temporary victories. The wounds borne, the suffering, the anguish experienced in all these different conflicts could be survived if anyone possessed a sufficiently intense desire to accomplish one thing, come hell or high water. As it happened, the particular thing to which Frost had clung for more than 20 years was a very stubborn and persistent ambition to succeed as a poet. I mean, the man's ambition, I think it's inspirational. He
Sure.
he he did not give up. Was that because of his ego? Yeah, but also he knew he was great. He knew his writing deserved to be published. And I mean, he shaped 20th century, I think, poetry, especially American literature, forever. Because the way that he chose to deal with his pain and his ego, which was immense, his ambition was to turn that into something beautiful. And in some cases, very dark, very nihilistic, but beautiful. And I'm not saying art excuses everything. It doesn't excuse his personal failings. But I am inspired by him. Like, this is a man, again, complicated, suffered a lot in his life, lost four of his children, died before he did, um, dealt with depression, dealt with financial, like, again, he didn't find success as a poet until middle age. A lot of rejection, a lot of rejection as a poet. But he persisted because, again, he just had this belief. It's like, I will be a poet. Isn't that kind of inspirational?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. That's that's awesome. Um, yeah, do you have anything else? Was that all of it? Is that the armchair session?
Mm, can I share one more quote?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Again, this is from Theodore Morrison, Agitated Heart. Frost wanted to be found out by the right people in the right way. The agitation of his heart to be discovered was intense and did not cease to the end of his life. I think that's what it means to be a poet. Like, being a I think people who are not fans of poetry get frustrated sometimes because they're like, poetry is saying things like in a winking way. It's like, why can't you just be clear and just come out and say the thing? Why do you have to cover it up in rhyme and meter and metaphor and imagery? Why don't you just be plain and say the thing? I think it's kind of it's like that. It's like you want to be found out, but in the right way. You want the person who's trying to understand you to really put in the effort to understand you. Not that you want to be so vague or so unclear that you can never be found out, but it is this pain, it is this agitation to be discovered. But again, it has to be on your terms. And I think poetry provides that. It provides a way to expose yourself and be vulnerable and make art out of that and allow people to connect with you as a writer. But making a sort of beautiful mystery out of yourself. And Robert Frost, I mean, he's this beautiful mystery. I don't think for all these exhaustive volumes about his life, he's still just as mysterious to me as before. You know,
Right.
and that's
Right.
okay. And I think there's something so beautiful about that because he's a human being, and human beings are complicated. And I think he knew that that's where his power lay as a poet, and making because he didn't understand himself, and he's like, I'm gonna make something beautiful out of that. I don't know. I think that's what motivates every poet. Because again, we could just choose to write fiction or nonfiction.
True.
Some
True.
people would say that that's more plain, more straightforward. Poetry arguably isn't as straightforward. We do have these other layers of meaning um, that add to or layer on top of the literal meaning of the line that I think can feel like hiding to people. But isn't it beautiful?
Yeah, yeah. Poetry, I mean, it demands that we engage with it, you know.
Right,
Um poetry's kind of the poetry's not a needy friend.
right.
Poetry is okay without you.
Mm-hmm.
Um but poetry is also open, present, and, willing to engage you on deep levels if you put in the work.
Right.
Yeah, and poetry just has a very unique way of giving you experience beyond just the words, beyond just the sentences used. Um, yeah, oh, that's great. That's great. Shall we start enjoying poetry in front of people's eyes?
Let's let's do that.
Okay.
Do you want to go first?
I do want to go first. Okay, so we each chose a poem, and the poem I chose is called After Apple Picking, a kind of a classic Robert Frost poem detailing something done, some perhaps mundane thing done in human life. Yeah, we'll see where he takes it. I'm gonna take a Talbotian method with this, Micah, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Just gonna read it, and if I like something, I'm just gonna, just point it out, and you can too as well.
Do it.
Okay. After apple picking, my long two-pointed ladders sticking through a tree, toward heaven still. And there's a barrel that I didn't fill beside it, and there may be 2 or 3 apples I didn't pick up upon some bough. But I am done with apple picking now. I love that. Um, I love how the first 4 lines, 5 lines, are one sentence describing this experience
Mm-hmm.
and describing not being done with the actual task. And then the 1 line sentence that comes right after that. But I am done with apple picking now. It's just, it's so calming. It's nice. I like that the task is left unfinished.
Mm-hmm.
And I also really like how the second line is a very short line,
Mm-hmm.
which also kind of like imitates the task not being finished as well.
Well,
Um,
this is like a perfect bridge of like 19th century and 20th century poetry because it's like it's metered, but loosely. You know, there is a
right.
iambic pentameter going on, but he doesn't stick to it strictly. And there is like a nod to imagism. Like he's focused on a concrete physical thing, but it doesn't get very super abstract. So that's
Right.
kind of modern. But also it doesn't feel like Ezra Pound at all.
No, no, absolutely not. Okay, great. Essence of winter sleep is on the night. The scent of apples, I am drowsing off. I cannot rub the strangeness from my sight I got from looking through a pane of glass I skimmed this morning from the drinking trough and held against the world of hoary grass. It melted, and I let it fall and break. But I was well, upon my way to sleep before it fell, and I could tell what form my dreaming was about to take. Magnified apples appear and disappear, stem end and blossom end, and every fleck of russet showing clear. Um, I just love all the descriptions there. Holy moly.
Mm-hmm.
Just like it's
Yeah,
describing a really simple thing, but it's putting in all of the work to make it, to like elevate it to a higher
yeah,
level, you know?
hmm yeah.
Um, yeah. Okay.
I mean, the consonants. Consonants means like if anybody doesn't know, it's like this. So there are vowels, letters that are vowels, and letters that are consonants. Consonants just means you're really stacking and emphasizing the letters that are consonants. So there's the consonants in that is so fantastic. Like the sounds just feel so full. A plus. A plus, Robert.
A plus. Okay. Okay, I kind of lost what line I was on. Um, okay, we're gonna start with My instep arch not only keeps the ache, it keeps the pressure of a ladder round. I feel the ladder sway as the boughs bend, and I keep hearing from the cellar bin the rumbling sound of load on load of apples coming in. For I have had too much of apple picking. I am overtired of the great harvest I myself desired. There were 10,000 fruit to touch. Cherish in hand, lift down, and not let fall. For all that struck the earth, no matter if not bruised or spiked with stubble, went surely to the cider apple heap, as of no worth. One can see what will trouble this sleep of mine, whatever sleep it is. Were he not gone, the woodchuck could say whether it's like his long sleep, as I describe its coming on, or just some human sleep. Oh, I love this. I love this looking at what is desired by Robert Frost and, just, I don't know, this harvest that himself he desired, and now that
Right.
he's overtired of it, that was nice. That's
It's
good.
so human. Like, granted, not I've never done apple picking, because I'm not a character in a Hallmark movie, but I I think I experience that all the time. Like, you want something, but then the result of getting what you want involves a troubling amount of work or a side effect that you didn't intend or predict. And it just feels like such a great human irony. It's such a human irony. It's like, and you want this connection to nature that he's just expressing, but the connection to nature, like a human connection to nature, is in its essence utilitarian. Like the apples are being used for something.
Right.
They have to be. And it's very fraught and it's very complicated. It's human. It's human.
Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of one of the basic tenets of Robert Frost poetry, the sound of sense, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And for those of y'all who've not heard of it, it is the difference between reading a portion of Alice in Wonderland and um, and also like hearing someone talking from the other side of the room.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the idea is that when you're eavesdropping on someone, you don't know what they're saying, but you hear from their cadence that what they're saying sounds sensical.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell whether they're trying to convince someone to do something, whether they're trying to ask a question of someone. You can tell what emotions are involved, even if you don't know the specific details of what's going on. Um, and Robert Frost always made sure to imbue his meter with a sound of sense. Um, that it would seem to make sense if someone were listening in on it, which seems so simple, but it's such a high bar
Right.
in the same at the same time.
Well, you can't be too rhymey, you know? Because rhyme
True.
does feel unnatural if it's spoken in dialogue.
Right.
Um, and it can't be too ornate, because that also
Mm-hmm.
sounds. But, if it's poetry, it has to have layered meaning, it has to have consonants, it has to
Mm-hmm.
have rich
Mm-hmm.
sounds, and yet it can't feel stiff. It's such a fine line.
It's like the direct opposite of poetic diction.
Right.
Instead of leaning into your poetic license and saying whatever you want in whatever wild way you want, it is really prioritizing um, prioritizing the natural soundedness of your work while also conforming it to something as difficult as iambic pentameter, or other poetry forms.
But
Yeah.
I just feel like I want to be clear about something. Like Robert Frost poems, I have to read them through several times because they are very layered. I don't want to
Right.
have people mistakenly thinking I'm calling him simple. Like his poetry is not simple. It's complex. It's layered.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds worlds different than like a romantic poet, like a Byron or a Keats, because they're very rhymy and they're very very strictly metered, generally speaking,
Mm-hmm.
and they do use anastrophe, meaning they rearrange the syntax to make the rhymes work. So it doesn't sound like something that people would naturally say. It sounds very poety. Robert Frost, like you said, it sounds vaguely dialogue-y. It sounds like you could be saying that.
Right, right. He imbues each of his poems with like a common person that
Exactly.
would say the thing that he is saying. Um, and then like just capturing simple things like this apple picking, or like what we end the poem on, this sleep that is either natural or just human. You know, he finds, so he has the common person. He also just has these common themes that he raises to a poetic level and allows to
Hmm.
shine.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, let's. Can we go on to your poem now, Micah?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
My poem is called The Most of It. It's not as widely anthologized as After Apple Picking, because After Apple Picking, I think, is very quintessential Robert Frost. This one's a little weirder. But I thought it was good to talk about. I wanted to have the balance of the quintessential Robert Frost and kind of the weirder side.
Excellent, excellent. I'm not sure if I've ever read this poem before, so I'm excited to learn about it as we go.
I guess I'll do what you do. If there's something that I think really stands out, I'll break up, or I might just read it through all the way.
Okay, yeah, go for it.
He thought he kept the universe alone, for all the voice and answer he could wake was but the mocking echo of his own, from some tree-hidden cliff across the lake. Some morning from the boulder-broken beach he would cry out on life that what it wants is not its own love back in copy speech, but counter-love, original response. But nothing ever came of what he cried, unless it was the embodiment that crashed in the cliff's talus on the other side, and then the far distant water splashed, but after a time allowed for it to swim, instead of proving human what it neared, and someone else additional to him, as a great bucket powerfully appeared, pushing the crumpled water up ahead, and landed pouring like a waterfall, and stumbled through the rocks with a thorny tread, and forced the underbrush, and that was all.
Okay. The first thing I'm noticing is that there seems to be a rhyme scheme here. um,
Yes.
look, does it just go A B A B
Mm-hmm.
C D C D?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool, cool.
But it doesn't feel super rhymey, does it?
No, no. We have some good enjambment where the sentence strides two or more lines. And
Always with the consonants. I mean, it's in some ways it's typical Robert Frost. He's out in nature. The speaker is out in nature. The speaker is experiencing some sort of, I think, longing for what he said. I mean, original response, right? He wants there to be something beside himself. If you want to interpret that in an existential way, like I do, like he wants it, there has to be some meaning.
sure.
And he wants it not to be the meaning that he makes, right? Not copy speech, but meaning outside of himself, you know? And then he's like, oh my gosh, look at this buck. Like this nature is answering my call. And then the buck is like, no, He's like, oh man, that was all. I mean, it's so nihilistic. It's like, is there something? There's like, it's nothing. There's nothing. I'm alone. And then maybe there's something. And then no, there's nothing. And I don't know what to make of it. This poem deeply puzzles me because it's pretty grim, and yet the fact that the poem exists and is like this was a cool thing suggests that he doesn't really buy his own thesis that that was all because he wrote the poem. So the poem is
Hmm.
obviously trying to figure something out. What do I mean by this? The poem obvi- means that he thinks that there was some worth to this experience, that there was something about the book, whether that's nature or the divine or the sublime, that's like that is a definite thing that gives meaning and purpose to things outside of myself. But then he's like, no, but it doesn't. And yet he writes the poem about how it doesn't. So he's celebrating. Is he celebrating the nihilism, the lack of meaning? That doesn't seem to ring true to me. And yet he says, no, there's nothing.
It is curious. I do think there's always room for the text to say much more than it seems to say, or
Mm-hmm.
even the opposite of what it's saying. Like
Right.
I remember our teacher Michael Lavers bringing up that Robert Frost's most famous poem, the Two Roads Diverging Yellow Wood.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I remember him bringing up that the poem is just completely like sarcastic or just like contrary to its um, supposed thesis,
Mm-hmm.
at the end that everyone, chants in an effort to empower themselves. The whole I took the road less traveled by, and it has made all the difference. Um, which I do think that there are signs in that poem that is,
Mm-hmm.
that he is kind of like mocking it as you go. Um, so yeah, but are you finding things within the text that are like supporting this thesis of yours that it's like maybe less about finding nothing and nihilism than it seems to be on the surface? Did that question make sense?
No, it did. It did. I'm just
Okay.
thinking. It's a good question. I guess I'd have to get kind of meta and say that the whole idea of a poet audience relationship implies that there is some meaning outside of oneself. Otherwise, why write for an audience? But again, I'd have to get quite meta because the literal text of the poem, that thesis in the literal poem is like, oh, that was all. Nothing. But
Right.
But yet the text, the celebration of the book is powerful, like a waterfall. He seems to want an experience that he himself means nothing. Yet he wants that experience to evoke emotion in the reader.
Hmm. Interesting. Um, all right. So I need to wrap up soon, unfortunately. Can we call it good for that poem?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Um, yeah. Sorry to cut you off, folks. We had a hard time getting all our tech stuff going. This is like our premiere episode, and
Mm-hmm.
um, but yeah, we plan to have more of them. Hoping that you will all come and join us as we read public domain poems and just like appreciate them out loud with some psychoanalysis of the poems of the poets involved too, or whatever. Um,
Always.
some light psychoanalysis. Um, but yeah, so we're gonna end with just a little writing prompt I'm going to give you. Feel free to do this if you would like, audience of ours. Um, Two choices for you. One, you may either write a poem about the most important plant in your life. Yeah. Think about all the plants that have been part of your life. Maybe it is the fruit of, of a plant that nourishes you that you eat often, or maybe it's a childhood tree that grew up, that was already mature or was growing near your family home. I don't know what your most important plant is to you, but that's one option. The other option would be to either take a hike or to go to some metropolitan area with a flowing water fountain and to ponder your existence and if there are original responses or not, and to write a poem in that vein. Um, so yeah, there you go. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. So yeah, stay immersed yourselves in the whims of verse, to not fall heretic to the wiles of your prosaic lives.
Bye.